Oh, so dudes, how's it going? It's your boy Brennan back again. Sunday PSA number 3. Couple weeks into quarantine here, still hanging out at St. Joseph's Parish. We're having a good time, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Scripture and Jesus and unconditional love today. So thanks for coming, and happy to have you along here for the ride. We're talking about one of my all-time favorite Bible passages. It's in the Gospel of John, very start of chapter number 8, and it's called A Woman Caught in Adultery. Start off by reading the Bible passage, then we're going to talk a little bit more about it. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Then each went to his own house, while Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. But early in the morning he arrived again in the temple area, and all the people started coming to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and made her stand in the middle. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So, what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they could have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. But when they continued asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he bent down and wrote on the ground. And in response they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders. So he was left alone with the woman before him. Then Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She replied, "No one, sir." Then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on do not sin anymore." The question that I always jump to whenever I finish reading this is, where's the dude? Where's the guy? Adultery, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, is a two-way street. And it says in the reading that they had caught her in the very act of adultery, meaning that there must have been another person there with her. Yet they choose to tear this woman away and bring her to the town square, probably not wearing a bunch of clothing, and throw her before Jesus and ask for judgment. The Jewish law at the time, that being the law of Moses, this woman, the correct punishment for a sin like this would be to stone her, to throw stones at her until she's dead. So Jesus really could have taken the easy way out here and said, yeah, have at it, go get after it. That's what Moses said, you go do you. But he takes a completely different approach. Instead, he basically just ignores them and eventually says, okay, great, this woman has sinned. But tell you what, the person that is in this crowd that does not have a sin, has not sinned, you throw the first stone and we'll get this thing going. An insanely radical idea for the time. This is, like we talked about last week, completely undermining the teachings of the Pharisees and a lot of the religious leaders at the time. And you can see why these religious leaders started plotting and planning behind the scenes to have Jesus crucified. Because this idea of forgiveness and looking past other people's shortcomings or things like that was so completely radical and so opposed to the law at the time that they'd been following. I want to touch on that ties in directly with the reading is when Jesus said, "He among you who is without sin be the first to cast the stone," and nobody casts the stone because they think about it and they realize that all of them have sinned, all of them have done things that God wouldn't like, that God didn't create them for. First off, it's the elders who start to go away first. It's the oldest and the most wisest of the Pharisees that realize what Jesus is saying and go away. So that's interesting, first off. Secondly, the only person in that entire crowd, the only person in the history of human existence that is without sin and was therefore worthy to cast a stone was Jesus. And when all these people go away, this woman is still either huddled in the dirt or put up against a wall, absolutely scared for her life. And Jesus asks her, "Where did these men go?" And she says, "I don't know. They must have left." And he said, "Did nobody condemn you?" And she says, "No." And then Jesus, who is the King of Kings and who is the Lord of Lords and had every right, being without sin, to punish her for this thing, instead says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go forth and sin no more." We need to recognize and realize that this grace that was offered to this woman is offered to us every single day of our lives. Every time we open our eyes in the morning until when we go to sleep at night, this grace is overflowing and it is constantly offered to us, so that when we mess up, when we fall short, when we aren't our very best selves, Jesus does not condemn us. Jesus stays with us in that time. He loves us through that time, and he brings us to a better and more full life. And that's something that we can really lean on in these times. We live in slightly more civilized times where mobs aren't going around and stoning people and doing things like that. But in a metaphorical sense, that absolutely is still happening. I remember when I was in high school, rumors would spread like wildfire, and someone that was cool one day was suddenly at the very bottom rung of the social ladder the next day because somebody said something about them, and it passes on and it flies. Word flies like the wind. So what we can do to follow Jesus in these types of times is to remind ourselves that our job as Christians and as followers of Christ is not to condemn people. It is always to meet them wherever they are and to love them in that time and to accompany them in that time and to show them compassion and remind them that even though so many people around them might see them as nothing more than the rumor that they've been told about them, that they are a daughter or a son of Christ and they are worthy of love and compassion and dignity, and that they are so much bigger than their sins or the things that they've done wrong in their lifetime. All that being said, thank you again for tuning in. Like and subscribe if you're about that life. If not, then have a great week. My prayers are with you. Continue to social distance, continue to do all those great things, and we will get on the rock going as soon as we possibly can. Just know that I miss you. I love you. I'm thinking about you. I'm praying for you. And yeah, have a great week.